Everyone. Good morning. Okay, I'm really happy to see everyone here. Uh, I'm Supervisor Noelia Corzo, and I'm going to just give some brief welcoming remarks. And I want to acknowledge, first and foremost, that we are standing on the unceded territories of the Ohlone and other Indigenous peoples who call the unceded territories of the San Francisco Bay Area their traditional homeland. They are the descendants of the village sites that are seen and unseen. We pay respect to the ancestors, elders, and relatives of Indigenous peoples for their historic and current contributions to San Mateo County, and we commit to an ongoing effort to bring about healing, inclusivity, and deeper collaborative partnerships. Thank you again for joining us, and I'm excited to share that I've been part of the Shared Prosperity Coordinating Council since I joined the Board of Supervisors in January of 2023. As we know, just and fair inclusion in our county means that everyone can participate in economic, civic, and social opportunities. And this is one of my top priorities and motivations for running for the Board of Supervisors in the first place. And we know achieving this vision can't be done alone, and it certainly can't be done by focusing just on one or two issues. Life is a little too messy and complex for that. So it really takes all of us working together, going in the same direction. And that's why I'm excited to be a part of the collaborative efforts that have led us to bringing together so many diverse leaders across all sectors in our county who value focusing on ensuring dignity, belonging, and shared prosperity for all of our residents and neighbors here in San Mateo County. And this systemic approach has brought us to where we are today, and it's taken a lot of investment, a lot of time and energy. And I want to thank each and every council member for putting in the hard work to get us here today. And with that, I especially want to thank Supervisor Gaucher for joining me on the council and taking former Supervisor Slocum's place once he termed out. I'm really excited for the energy and the perspective that Supervisor Gaucher brings, and all of her track record in advancing equity and shared prosperity in East Palo Alto and beyond. And we're looking forward to working together to champion the values and approaches and strategies of the council. And she'll be closing out our webinar today. So with that, I will be turning it over to Shireen Malik of Sali to go over the agenda. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Supervisor Corso. Really appreciate your leadership on this topic and on this council. For our time together, we will just talk through a little bit of logistics, begin an activity, and then we'll ground ourselves in some of the local challenge that frames the Shared Prosperity Challenge. We will then look at a framework around upward mobility that has led us to looking at data and building a platform for shared prosperity. We'll have a partner, Derek Ong, join us for a picture of data to inform decisions. They'll go over infrastructure that we're building around data portals so that anyone in the community can access information around shared prosperity. Then we'll hear from Roseanne Faust and Kalima Salahuddin around some of the strategies to move the needle. How do we address the gaps and needs? And then I'll share some next steps before we hear closing remarks by Supervisor Lisa Gaucher. So as far as logistics go, just want to note that this is a webinar. While most of you that have joined us are either colleagues and partners and certainly friends, we have wanted to keep a little bit more control over the session so that we don't hear background noise. This is a webinar. It's being recorded, so we'll be able to share it for those who couldn't make it. And you are muted. We are asking that you put your questions into the Q&A function that's on the bottom of your screen. If you click into it, you can add in questions, and we'll open up the questions as we go throughout. We hope you get to add in the questions as they come up for you so you don't forget them. We'll collect them through and address them at the end. We also are using something called Mentimeter. It's a website, or you can use your smartphone. And ultimately, that's a way of doing polling that you can see in real time. So if you have a smartphone, or you can pull up a web page, go ahead and do so, because we're going to use it and test it out in just 1 minute. If you have any technical issues, if you have any key participation questions or follow-ups, feel free to send a chat bottom into it'll go to the hosts. And then again, if you have any technical issues, we'll help you troubleshoot. Okay, here's our Mentimeter. For some of you, this may be new. It's an easy way to do polling. You can use the QR code by putting your camera on your phone and pushing close. You'll see a URL pop up. You can click into it, and you'll join the same page as if you go to www.menti.com. And then you enter in this code, and this is our event code, so that you will then, questions that you'll see on the slide deck will show up on your web page, and you can respond to them. They will be anonymous. If you have any questions about how to participate, please do go ahead and chat into the chat function, and we'll help you troubleshoot. But again, it's www.menti.com, and the code is 8978-3277. All right, next slide. First question we have for you is, what does shared prosperity mean to you? In one word. I know this is a challenge, but go ahead and get your responses firing. I'm going to pause for a moment to make sure everyone is linked into Menti. You'll have plenty of time to respond to that if you want to sit and think about it. We're going to be sharing results in about 10 to 15 minutes. Okay, so who is the Shared Prosperity Coordinating Council? Well, I should start by introducing myself a little bit. I am Shireen Malik-Kibzali Taidi. I am the Chief Equity Officer for the County of San Mateo, as you see the logo listed here. I host the Shared Prosperity Coordinating Council that includes all these wonderful organizations that you see posted on this slide. These are leaders from across San Mateo County that are dedicated to supporting people who do not share in the prosperity that this county has, and may come to addressing that lack of shared prosperity in different ways, whether it's providing core social services, whether it is providing workforce opportunities, philanthropy, early childhood education, but all of us are here with the purpose of expanding shared prosperity for the communities that we all serve. Next slide. The Shared Prosperity Coordinating Council started as the Recovery Council, which was put together to help inform the county as we were identifying where do we invest the recovery dollars after COVID to stabilize our communities. We understood that stability was very important. We needed people to be able to help meet their basic needs. We understand that that has not necessarily happened for everyone, but we want to also make sure that we understand what's the pathway between stabilizing and mobilizing. How do we get to mobility outcomes where people can meet self-sufficiency, not just meet their basic needs? We want to understand what are some pathways to prosperity. Next slide. When we started to look at transitioning from stability to pathways to prosperity, we then asked ourselves, who's on this council? What kind of lived experiences and expertise do people bring that relates to the concepts of shared prosperity? And also, what sectors and organizations need to be involved? So we did a sectoral analysis, identified any gaps we felt were necessary to help inform the Shared Prosperity Action Plan. And we asked that we think about the diversity of representation, people who had been on social support systems, lived in different locations, have experienced different challenges through life so that they can bring those perspectives as expertise onto the council. And once we put all that together, next slide, we then decided what's the approach we want to take. One of the things we wanted to focus on certainly was diverse representation. Representation means having voice for those in our communities, especially those that are likely to benefit or be burdened by the decisions that we make. And then we wanted to take a data-driven approach, using data to inform our decision-making, looking closely at where we might have gaps in our knowledge, filling those gaps through the data. Throughout the process, we want to use an equity-focused approach to prioritizing populations that are furthest from meeting some of those basic needs or those opportunities for pathways to prosperity. And we recognize that we need to engage communities and hear directly from people on the ground who are experiencing these challenges in meaningful ways. And as we look at the data and understand the challenges, we also need to understand what are the assets that are already out there. So we did a landscape analysis, recognizing that we don't want to be redundant. We want to build on existing efforts underway and fill gaps. And we felt it was important to be accountable, to provide transparency, track our progress, learnings, and make adjustments. So these have been our core principles throughout the process and how we've approached our planning process to date. We're going to ask you a Mentimeter question now about these principles. If you could go back to that page, we have a question for you on the approaches. You see these, as you can see, this is live populating with the feedback on approaches. I love to see these coming in. Appreciate the representation, very thorough, good combination of community experience and data, building trust and inclusion. Representation and lived experience matters. We have right now 97 people on this webinar. 26 people have responded, 28. We don't have to get everyone, but I do want to get people interacting a little bit with the content, because that's how we're going to grow and understand if we're heading in the right direction. Quality of life, countywide moral imperative, and shared responsibility. I appreciate the inclusion of those who will be most closely impacted by decisions. Great, lots of notes on representation and lived experience and community engagement. All right, next slide. So in thinking about shared prosperity, we first had to ground ourselves in the challenge. If you look at the greatest challenge we face structurally is that we have an hourglass economy. By that, I mean that we have very high wage jobs that drive very low wage jobs. And with that, we're really missing the middle income. And what happens in this case where you have very high job earners, the housing market in particular, but all of the cost of living in the area is driven by the high wage earners. That was what drives the high cost of housing, for example. And so what happens then is that the low wage earners are squeezed even more. They are earning low wages, but they're also squeezed in an economy that is set up and structured for the high wage earners. So the housing market is tight, and it makes it much more difficult for low wage earners to be able to sustain, let alone thrive. Next slide. And what does it take to afford San Mateo County? So when we're talking about low wage earners, how close are they to being able to have an affordable life in San Mateo County? Here you can see generally what it takes to live affordably in San Mateo County, depending on your family construct. These are not small numbers. Oftentimes, these are numbers that you wouldn't necessarily think of as having difficulty affording someplace, like over $100,000 salary for a couple. But in our area, we have a lot of prosperity. The challenge is that we don't have a lot of shared prosperity. Next slide. So what you can see here is that while we have 13% of the population living in what we're using a metric called the California Poverty Measure, and that's a metric identified by the Public Policy Institute for California's Economic Policy Center. Sarah Bond, the executive director of the Economic Policy Center, is on our council and has been incredibly helpful in identifying data and supporting us in our understanding. And if you think about that poverty threshold, well, we have only 13%, but we have 13% living underneath that. 44% of the population live above that poverty line, but still cannot afford the local housing cost. That means that over 50% of our population in the county cannot afford the county that they live in. Next slide. So thinking about that challenge, how do we understand a framework to address it? These are not simple issues. There is no one solution to solve this challenge. So what is a framework that can help us understand the comprehensive nature of the challenges and the opportunities to create shared prosperity in our county? We used this, we started to look at national models. The Gates Foundation in particular, several years back, recognized that poverty is not new. There are organizations that have been looking and analyzing and understanding and trying to address poverty for decades and decades. So what do we learn about that? The Gates Foundation brought some of those that had been working on anti-poverty measures for decades together. And over the course of a year, they developed the upward mobility framework that the Urban Institute led and holds on to now. What they identified is that their upward mobility is not just about economic success, that in fact, there are 3 parts defining upward mobility: dignity and belonging, economic success, and power and autonomy. And under those 3 domains, there were 5 key pillars that hold up the concept and definition of prosperity. They include rewarding work, high quality education, opportunity to rich and inclusive neighborhoods, healthy environments, and access to good health care, as well as responsive and just governance. And they also went in and said, how do we predict how communities are doing in relationship to these key pillars? They identified predictors. So these are indicators where you can look at the data and better understand how well our communities doing around shared prosperity. And throughout the process, as you see in the banner link at the top, racial equity was understood to be necessary for all people and communities to prosper, especially those who have been excluded by structural inequities. The Shared Prosperity Council understood this was a way that all of the interests could be recognized as a framework, and yet we could then identify what within these pieces are important for us to tackle based on what the data shows and based on the landscape of existing efforts underway. And if you go to the next slide, we also recognize that while dignity, belonging, economic success, and power and autonomy are generally understood, we actually needed to understand them for our county. So I developed what we call universal prosperity goals for each of those domains. You see them listed here. And really what we wanted to say for example, for economic success is that people need reliable incomes that cover their expenses while building wealth. For being valued, people need to feel respected, they have dignity, well-being, and a sense of belonging and a way of contributing and being appreciated. And for power and autonomy, all residents have a voice and agency to influence larger policies and actions that shape their lives. Next slide. And then we said, if these are the predictors, these are identified by national experts for a national framework, what do we understand locally? We know that our local economy is slightly different, our local communities have different needs. We then decided we needed to better understand how this framework compared to our community's needs. Instead of going back and asking the community, we recognized that we had already been doing a number of community outreach and engagement efforts, collecting information about what our communities, particularly communities most in need, really needed to prioritize in order for them to be able to thrive. So we looked at, if you look at the next slide, we went back to 3 of our major community outreach events: the pandemic recovery community priorities, the immigrant survey that we did, and the Measure K community priorities, where we had surveys as well as community and district-wide events to capture different populations. Collectively, for example, these different outreach events came in multiple languages. The first one had 7 languages. The second immigrant survey was in 12 languages. Measure K supported 4 language survey, as well as listening sessions in 4 different languages. Collectively, we saw over 5,000 people responding. And what you can see from the results of these, that there's such a clear through line around what issues people face, regardless of when we've asked them, or specifically why we've asked them. And one of the things we didn't want to do is go back and ask and not recognize that they had already contributed. Once we looked at this, we compared what was most important for our communities locally against our national framework, and then decided that recognized that there were some key pieces missing that the national framework didn't have, but were important locally. They included job training and career pathways. This is the bottom line here: affordable childcare and youth enrichment, mental health, food security, and also throughout the process, we heard about culturally appropriate systems navigation and outreach across all of those: Measure K, the recovery, and the immigrant survey. So we wanted to make that prominent because that lives across all of our pillars. Next slide. As we thought about how do we understand and look at the data for this framework, we introduced and integrated another key framework called targeted universalism. That's an approach to analyze the mobility metrics to identify priority strategies and communities. So for example, if our universal goal is rewarding work, we then look at how well is the county as a whole doing in relationship to a predictor under rewarding work. Then we disaggregate that data by different segments of the population. That could be by age, by geography, by race, ethnicity, by ability. It sometimes depends on where and what the data we have available to us, but really looking deeply at the segments of the population that are most challenged to meet the universal goal of rewarding work. Then once we've identified those priority populations, those furthest, that would be B in this case, then we work with the population to identify specific issues and barriers to achieving the universal goal for that segment of the population, and develop targeted strategies to address the key barriers to ensure that everyone has a chance to thrive when it comes to rewarding work or any of the other predictors that we have. So total, if you go to the next slide, you'll see the framework that we put together, the national, integrating the local, as well as the targeted universalism approach. And what we'd love for you to do is take a look respond to some of the questions in the Mentimeter. Again, if you are new and joining us, please go to www.menti.com or use your phones with the QR code to link into the web page. Put in the code 8978-3277 and begin to answer those questions. You'll see the links in the chat as well. Next slide. On this next slide, you'll start to see in the responses coming in from strongly disagree on the left to strongly agree on the right. (15) 17 respondents, 19. I'm loving seeing how quickly this is going up at this point. Please continue to share your feedback. While this is nice to watch, it's also really important for us. This is how we're getting feedback on whether we're heading in the right direction. And you can continue to share your feedback as we continue to move forward. Okay. Now, we also want to know if you see key gaps in the framework, that you would share that with us, and so we can consider what we could fill in. I see a good question that it's raised around that there's a lot of goals. There's a lot of goals to reach shared prosperity. How are we focusing? And the council will share more information around how we then narrow in. Consider expanding youth enrichment to extended learning. School age before school, after school, and summer is a huge need. Still curious about how demographics determine priorities in certain areas. What are the practical steps that apply, and how will these actually work, especially around race equity? Is climate change or disaster recovery part of this? What strategies have been identified to meet these goals? Need to develop strategies for implementation. Absolutely. So keep these coming in if you have them. You don't have to feel like you have to come up with things. And I'm seeing some questions, and I certainly, we welcome them. And there is a Q&A function that I do hope that some of you with key questions can go ahead and transfer those into the Q&A so that when we get there, we'll be able to answer some of these questions. Next slide. Here we want to take a moment and just pause so that you recognize we want to be collecting questions along the way. We want to collect them into the Q&A portion. That's again on the bottom of your screen. You click into the Q&A and you can directly type in your question. And you can do that throughout any time. This is more of a reminder. Here, we also wanted to pause to share with you the screen that we asked about at the beginning, your first Menti experience, where you wrote in one word that defines shared prosperity to you. And here you can see a beautiful word cloud: community, equity, opportunity, thriving, health, democracy, inclusivity, access, abundance. I love that. Belonging, fairness, quality of life. This is wonderful. And I appreciate we had 68 participants who made their voices heard. There's also love here, which is beautiful. Children, self-determination, kindness, sustainable, spiritual wealth, empowered, vibrant communities. Beautiful, beautiful. Thank you. So when we think about this framework, part of the framework for us is in order for us to be able to look at and make data-informed decisions. So what we did was we looked at key metrics. We looked at lots of metrics. In fact, all of those predictors that you saw on the framework, we looked across the metrics, and then we highlighted several that we felt as a council really captured and helped us understand shared prosperity as a top line indicator or metric, though all of the metrics are really critical. So you can see that each of these metrics, predictors across the 5 pillars were things that we looked at. If you turn to the next slide, what we wanted to share with you was just to lift up a couple of the key metrics. Under economic success, a key metric is that all individuals and families have that reliable income. That's how we defined it. And when you look at a metric, how can we know who is meeting that universal goal? Well, median annual income tells us a lot about if people have reliable earnings. And what we did was look at it across, and again, using that targeted universalism approach where we disaggregate data by different segments of the population. We separated by male, female, as well as by race, ethnicity. And what you see here on the very left side of the dotted line is the San Mateo County as a whole. And you do see that males have higher median annual earnings. And then on the other side of the dotted line, you see the disaggregation by race, ethnicity, and you see where there is disparities by gender and disparities by race. So if you look at the white population in particular, you see the largest disparity between male and female annual earnings. And you certainly see a difference between annual earnings, for example, between Asian Americans and Latinx or mixed. Next key indicator for economic success, we looked at income growth. So what you see on the bottom on the x-axis are the percentile of earners. So the 90th percent of wages are those that make the most amount of money on their salary, and the 10th percent are those that make the least. And what you see here is that the growth, that's on the y-axis, the percentage of growth for our high wage earners and workers over the last 10 years is very dramatic, up to over 25% in income growth over the last decade. Whereas just the opposite is true for our 10th and 20th percentile low wage workers, where they are barely keeping up with inflation over the last 10 years. And this again is a depiction of our hourglass economy, and that hourglass economy is not actually moving low wage workers up at the same pace as our high wage earners. So we actually have an hourglass that's stretching further apart, creating greater income disparities. Next slide. Well, maybe actually, if you go back one slide, I'll say one more thing about this, which is this again shows how difficult it is to, in fact, house our low-wage worker population, and that housing cannot be the only solution that we focus on, even though it's a critical solution and must be addressed. We also have to consider earnings and the pace of earnings, because if we don't, we'll just continue to have this gap grow further and further, and we'll need to address housing at a continuous pace. Next slide. Looking at the next domain of being valued, where everyone feels respect and dignity and is appreciated, we looked at accessing benefits. And what we noticed was that there was the perception, when you ask the question in the Community Health Needs Survey, how easy is it to obtain social services in San Mateo County? The ones that we looked at who said fair or poor, which were the lowest available options to that idea of ease. And what we saw is that all populations felt 20% that it was poor or fair. But when you broke that down by different segments of the population, particularly if you look at race ethnicity, for example, you saw that Latinx, Black, and Pacific Islanders felt that it was much more difficult for them to access and obtain social services. And then we also then looked at gender as well as location. And you can see that in Mid-County, there was the least, people felt it was easiest to access and obtain social services, where it was most difficult on the coast side and then north side. And then for our LGBTQ plus population in particular, it was very high. It was kind of on par with our Latinx and our Black population. Next slide. Looking at power and autonomy, one of the key indicators that we lifted up was descriptive representation. So this is the number of elected leaders of racial and ethnic groups compared to the local population of that group. So you see on the left of the dotted line, you see the countywide population. Then when you look at the other side, we looked at male elected officials, female elected officials, and compared those also in the colors by race ethnicity. And so what you see here is an overrepresentation of male elected officials in comparison to the general public. You see an underrepresentation of females, and you see an overrepresentation of the white population in elected positions in comparison to our overall population. Next slide. So I mentioned these to be key indicators, so top line indicators, but there are lots of indicators that we've looked at. And one of the things we wanted to do is make that available to everyone, to our department directors, to our community-based organizations and leaders, the funders. Essentially, how could we create a localized data portal that related to shared prosperity for anyone to be able to get access to? If you go to the next slide, what you'll see here is this idea that we wanted to make sure that this data that we've been looking at and really helping us make a lot of decisions, both for our individual efforts as council members, outside of our council member role in our organizations, but also for the council. We want to make that available to everyone and make it a centralized resource hosted by the county to informed by the community with the framework, the data points. It's regularly updated. It will be. And then really a place where we could also disaggregate data by race, ethnicity, gender, city, all the different segments, bring in that targeted universalism approach, show trends over time. If you look at a snapshot, sometimes that doesn't tell us if we're moving in the right direction or not, because we don't look at where we have been. So the trends over time give us a sense of how are we doing and what's next. The data can be downloaded, so you can actually download the data if you want to depict it in different ways, take a look at it in different ways. And we'll also make sure that there are links to other relevant data portals. We know that there are lots of fantastic other data portals out there that are specific to the economy or specific to sustainability or policing, for example. So all of those will be linked so that you can go to a one-stop shop to access the great data that'll be available on shared prosperity through this targeted universalism approach, but also access these other data portals. And next slide, what I'm going to show you here, we're not going to go through each and every one of these, but I wanted to share with you how the data portal is structured. So the data portal is structured through the pillars of the framework, and they include many of those predictors, including some of the new ones that we have developed based on the local information and needs that we have. They include lots of great things. We showed median earnings, but we also include occupation. We include home ownership. We have preschool enrollment. third grade English and math proficiency. We are looking at commuting and housing affordability and student homelessness. We're looking at the uninsured population, public assistance, overcrowding, proximity to a grocery store, and also this descriptive representation of elected officials, but also candidates to the degree that we can find them. So now what I'd like to do is introduce a key partner and colleague of ours, Derek Young. He is the executive director at City Systems, a nonprofit organization that he is the founder of, and specifically founded in order to really be able to bring his expertise and support to organizations in the community. He's also a professor at Stanford. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Derek.
Thanks so much, Shireen. Yeah, as Shireen mentioned, my day job is I'm a researcher at Stanford in a lab that focuses on supporting governments, and I can't seem to get enough of that. So I also bring that experience and that skill base to nonprofit work, supporting groups like San Mateo County's Office of Equity and the Shared Prosperity Coordinating Council. Shireen gave a really good overview of kind of where we are in narrative here about the value of going from that existing council's set of priorities and preliminary analysis to a more robust platform. So let me just go ahead and show you where we're at with this. And then I'll close in just about 8 minutes with some last thoughts. And I think there's a link that is available for folks to try this live as well. And we're definitely interested in getting a bunch of general and detailed feedback here. The tool is an interactive dashboard. And it's meant to really create a kind of language, a shared language and vocabulary around how to tell this story about equity around these indicators. The tool has a tutorial, which for those who are coming to it at the first glance, can be guided kind of step by step into what all the different buttons do, but I'll go ahead and be doing that in real time here. At the very top left, there's this menu, which is exactly those pillars that Shireen mentioned. So when you've selected one of these pillars, like rewarding work and economic opportunity, then this next text box at the top here, which says worker earnings right now, that is a menu of all the specific indicators within that pillar. So as you change pillars, you get a different set of indicators, and then this list of indicators can grow over time within each pillar. For certain indicators, it's so broad of a category like worker earnings that there might be a few different ways to look at it that are helpful. So then you have also the ability to be even more specific with the sub-indicator. So we're looking at median value right now, but you can look at, say, percent of workers earning within a certain range. And those are just different variations on the same theme. So right now we are looking within the rewarding work pillar at median worker earnings. And so what are we looking at together here? The general template for this dashboard is to show 3 types of visuals, and then that is a common refrain throughout the dashboard. And it's about kind of building this muscle of how to talk about and notice the value of disaggregated data. So we have 2 kind of line charts, and then we have a map. Let's focus on the left line chart right now. And you'll notice that there's different colors, but there's one I'm going to highlight right now, which is the all category, and that's a green line. And it's always a green line in all of these charts. That is as if you just wanted to know median earnings for workers in all of San Mateo County together. And this is just a line chart showing what that value is. It's according to census data, around $72,000 as of 2023, and it's been marching steadily upwards at the county level over time. And let's all imagine if that was the only information you knew, and you would have a certain kind of reaction to that. And this dashboard is designed to help add much more nuance to that narrative. So in this chart itself, it's not just showing this single all trend line, but it's breaking it down into separate race ethnicity groups as available in the Census Bureau data. You can actually click on the menu here to switch to other types of demographic group disaggregations that are available for that data set. But right away, I think we can all imagine in communication saying, well, it's not that easy and it's not that simple to be talking about just a single notion of median earnings. If you break it up by race ethnicity, you start to see disparities. You start to see certain groups moving quite a bit more positively in this direction, others maybe stagnating or declining over time. And that creates a notice and awareness of a certain kind of disparity that we might want to correct. And then it brings to action all the different tools and creative energies that we can bring to solve that problem together. So that's what the left chart does. The middle chart complicates that even further, which is we've just been disaggregating by race ethnicity, but we should also recognize that there can be significant geographic variation, community by community variation in this outcome for the same groups. So by default, this shows in green, all, that's the notion of all groups. So this is basically all workers in La Honda versus all workers in Woodside versus all workers in North Fair Oaks. And even at that scale, you can tell very different stories about exactly what the state of median worker earnings is in different communities in San Mateo County. And with this dashboard, you can also switch to a particular group, say Asian American. And then it changes that middle plot and changes the map as well, which is connected to the middle plot to really show that geographic and racial ethnic variation. So imagine all the different things you might not be aware of until you saw data presented in this kind of granular and detailed way. And this is just unlocking and capturing all the valuable information that comes through programs like the Census Bureau's surveys. And then it's showing you with this kind of common access that how much you would be missing in terms of the actual disparities compared to that original view of, say, just worker earnings for all of the county together. A few different ways to view things. We can actually switch to, say, focusing on a specific community in the middle chart, and that presents kind of side by side, left and middle, very similar approach to showing all racial ethnic groups, but countywide versus an individual community. So if you're working in a particular geography in San Mateo County, this might be a common view you want to switch to. And then, of course, the map, you can kind of switch years. So those are all the gadgets and gizmos in terms of just telling the story. And we were just looking at median value for worker earnings, and we can be switching to all kinds of other indicators as shown in the previous slide from Shireen. So just to kind of exemplify that, let me switch over to high quality education and information. By default, the first one on this list was educational attainment by adults, specifically the percent of adults who don't have a high school diploma. So we can, again, see the same narrative at work here. There are certain racial and ethnic groups that are doing very differently on this outcome, and you would not know that if you didn't have the data in front of you and be able to track potential corrective action on that. You see the geographic spreads as well. Let me just switch over here to, say, effective public education. This data doesn't come from the Census Bureau. This is coming from state education data sets, and we're trying to bring together all the best kind of rich disaggregated data sets that are available. And here we're actually seeing at the school district level differences in third grade math proficiency. And you can see, again, major racial ethnic disparities as well as major geographic ones. I think we would all kind of, having worked in the county, be aware of some of these key disparities and maybe already set our sights on really correcting these. So I'll just say a couple notes before kind of handing this back. I recognize that many folks in the room, I've worked with many of you, I can see in the attendee list, are working on important areas that may not yet be captured by this dashboard. The dashboard is upstream of a few different use cases, right? So it could be part of helping to build that deliberative environment to really figure out what those shared priorities are. And I think this is really about, it does help in that regard by giving everybody a common language for that. But it also can be a kind of more expansive menu because we all are all doing important work in different areas. And then hopefully, even in your specific area over time, you'd find a way for this dashboard to make it easy to grab that insight you need to communicate to a certain audience or even to a funder and so forth. So I think there could be a variety of use cases here. And the dashboard is explicitly designed to be able to grow on those axes, to basically continue to add data indicators over time to the degree that they are deemed really valuable and important for different stakeholders. So we've designed it with that kind of long-term infrastructure in mind. And we are still actively working, as Shireen mentioned, on some really exciting indicators that would be about unlocking useful data from within county departments as well. So in some cases, this might be data you can't see anywhere else, but in this type of county equity dashboard. I'll also just note that it sets a kind of framework, as I mentioned, this language for talking about disparities. But it also sets a kind of bar for rigor, that we need a certain kind of quality of data so that it's not too uncertain as well. We need enough of that data. It needs to be collected in the first place. I noticed Cecilia in the chat mentioning, where's the data for Native Americans and females? In many cases, the Census Bureau does not provide that intersectionality. And that could be all the more reason that when we see the absence of certain kinds of granular data through a dashboard like this, that also helps us all kind of stay aligned on kind of the calls for either getting better data or preserving the data we do have right now, and making sure that doesn't go away. So that's a part of this process as well. But my job has been to try to find the most detailed data we do have from really reputable sources and to really set up that template so that we can have that kind of conversation moving forward. And to end, I'll just show, for example, if we switch over to opportunity-rich and inclusive neighborhoods, if, say, you were wondering what some of the root causes of some of the other disparities we were seeing are, and we can say, switch over to housing cost burden. And this would be renters in a community or within a racial ethnic group that are paying over 30% of their income on rent. We're all very familiar with that kind of data, but notice how sparse this plot is compared to the ones we were seeing before that were full lines. This is to say that only as of 2023 did the Census Bureau provide the racial ethnic breakdown of this information at the scale of say, our cities and our county here. So it looks sparse, but in some sense, this is really recognizing and appreciating that we are getting the best available data we can get at the moment. And we really want to hold on to that data as well and really make the case for how useful it is for empowering the kinds of decisions we want to make at the local level. And then we let that story be told at a broader kind of audience as well. Okay, with that, I think I'll hand it back to Meg to switch over to the next slide here. And excited there'll be ways to share feedback through different channels that Meg will describe now.
Wonderful. So right now we do have this question about on the Mentimeter around getting feedback from you on the dashboard, whether it's intuitive to use based on the demonstration, whether it includes the metrics that are of interest to your organization, and whether you would recommend this dashboard to colleagues and partners. I want to acknowledge that the dashboard crashed. So many of you would not at this moment recommend it. But I will say that it is right now being hosted on a personal server in this beta mode while we do outreach and get feedback before we transfer it to the cloud or somewhere where we get a subscription, and it will not, the challenges will not be there when we have that. But right now with we've got 100 people that are accessing it. This is the most that this personal server has ever seen. So we will continue to work on that. And if you could just take down or copy the link, you will be able to access it afterwards. So with 24 people responding, we've got some good information here, and let us keep going forward to our next slide. Here, we're going to put this link in the chat. We have the opportunity to share you'll have the opportunity to share direct feedback using a Google Doc on any of the specific indicators, any general feedback that you might have, and be able to play around on this data dashboard. We also welcome you to share it with the people in your organization that work on data, for example. It may not be you, it may be others who are accessing data to better understand program planning. You may be more on the development side. So we encourage you to share it with those that would be using it to make decisions and ask them to provide feedback. We do ask that you don't share this out beyond your internal networks and connections, because as you can see, this is in a beta mode, and we want to make sure that we make it accessible to those that are part of this group to provide feedback. And it looks like Andrew says the link is back up, so please do go ahead and access that, maybe not all at once. And we welcome you to share the feedback. And here we go. Andrew has put both the dashboard link as well as the feedback form. Okay, so with that, I'm going to just go to this next slide here where we're going to talk about solutions. Some of you raised this when we've shared the framework. Well, what are the strategies? How are we going to address this? This is a lot. How do we narrow in? So this is the section that will talk a little bit about how we've done that here. If you can go to the next slide, I'd like to introduce the speakers for this section. We have Kalima Salahuddin, who's the Community Program Manager at Excelsis, as well as the co-chair for the REACH Coalition in the county. And we also have Roseanne Faust, President and CEO of SAMCETA. And I'm going to turn it over to Roseanne to share with you the process for our analysis to coming to solutions, as well as some of the solutions for economic success. Thank you, Roseanne.
Thank you so much, Shireen. And I want to first acknowledge Shireen, her team, the Board of Supervisors of San Mateo County, the County Executive's Office, because to take the work of the Recovery Coordination Council and move it forward to the Shared Prosperity Council, I think we can all thank them for their efforts, for their belief in what we did during COVID-19 and post-COVID, and to move it forward to today and all the great information that's shared. So moving to the next slide, we're going to talk about the landscape analysis. And what we wanted to do is, through the landscape analysis, is really recognize all the efforts that are underway to address all the things that have been highlighted this morning. I think a look back to a look to today and a look forward really can help us in informing our work. We wanted to identify any gaps where the efforts are very nascent or being built upon currently. And again, really recognizing all the good work in the community and many of you that are joining us today. And then we wanted to look at the strategies to address the gaps and see what's feasible, what's impactful, and actually what's doable today. So if we move to the next slide, we landed on, in thinking about the three circles: prosperity, economic success, being valued, and power and autonomy. We looked at existing efforts and identifying critical gaps. And we came up with, and this shouldn't be a surprise to anyone, creating more pathways to living wage careers for local residents, providing enhanced navigation support for benefits programs. So thinking about wraparound services, because while we can provide a great pathway and livable careers, if folks don't have the wraparound services, whether it be childcare, housing, transportation, stability within core family life, then a lot of the work on the creating better careers becomes fraught. And then fostering diversity of elected and appointed representation, really being intentional in our work. We have 20 cities and a county, and thinking about who is participating in the conversations, who is at the table, who do we need to invite to the table, and focusing on that. So I think it's a part of each of our work as members of the Shared Prosperity Council. It certainly is to be acknowledged, the county's great work in this effort, and really bringing our cities and our community stakeholders along. Moving to the next slide. So what did we think about? What are two areas that we can focus on today? One is with anchor institutions, and that's leveraging our major employers to create employment opportunities, to invest in workforce development, and to procure locally. So thinking about our large employers, from the County of San Mateo to the family of employers at San Francisco International Airport, to our community college district, to our major corporate partners. How can we encourage them to creating these paths forward? And then think about career pipelines. I know many folks, I recognize them participating today. We're at Job Train's Breakfast of Champions breakfast this morning. So Job Train from a career perspective, and NovaWorks, our federally funded workforce investment board that represents all of our communities and the County of San Mateo. So looking at career pipelines and workforce, how do we move those entry-level positions up the career ladder, and how do we provide what is necessary? I'm going to turn it over to my colleague and friend, Kalima, to go through the following slides on the landscape analysis. Kalima?
Sure. Thank you so much, Roseanne. And I just want to thank everyone for being here today. I'm excited to finally be able to talk about this to a broader community outside of the committee. So the next strategy for consideration, and talking about being valued, as someone who has lived in this county and this community for a while, and been through a myriad of different challenges: homelessness, being a single mother with 3 kids. I've had to utilize services a lot, and really leaning into and being the most successful when I feel respected when I am navigating services. And so how do we make sure that the support that we give and the support that we're offering also includes humanity and seeing the full person, not just their issue? So whether in our county we're looking at school resources, community-based resources, families in particular, especially those that have multiple jobs and are struggling to make ends meet, which is in itself its own kind of trauma. the added burden of navigating multiple systems that may be complex and need, variety of referrals and follow-up and different types of eligibility. And at times you're doing parallel, like you're applying for childcare and you're applying for other services at the same time. Doing it all in the same, doing it all at once could be a lot for anyone, but especially someone that's going through this particular kind of trauma. And on top of that, the burden that many people aren't aware of the variety of different resources that are available to them, or when they're applying, may just give up because of the level of complexity that's attached to many of the supports that we offer. And then looking at a benefits calendar and ensuring that when we do offer help or we do offer support, it doesn't negate support and help that's already being received. So for an example, my son is on Social Security because he's an adult with autism, and that comes with so many different triggers that could end up him losing benefits by receiving help in other areas, a lot of times that he's unaware of and is not able to explain to you. So being able and ensuring that on our end, especially the variety of different benefits, medical benefits, and other things that are offered to ensure that we have healthy communities aren't lost by the act or simple act of giving support. And then also identifying a lack of understanding of shared prosperity in general as a whole. A lot of these things we're preaching to the choir to people who are here on the call, but as a whole, having a narrative strategy would help us be more intentional, having effective messaging, and having us all using the same language. Next slide. And then for power and autonomy, we identified the need to support pipelines for diversifying representation in appointed and elected roles. This is one that's especially dear to me, having been a former elected official myself, serving 12 years in the Jefferson Union High School District. And fostering diversity improves representation for the lived experience for those whom we all choose to serve. I know I talk a lot. I have to remind myself not to talk. In my first board meeting, I said I was going to stay silent, but an issue came up that immediately I was able to give impact on, being a Black mother and having that lived experience, that I was like, oh, I can't stay silent because no one else in the room is able to speak to this. Making sure that that happens everywhere in all of our leadership roles. And we're a diverse county in income and age and race and gender, sexuality, neurodivergency. And so providing outreach and trainings and resources for leadership in those underrepresented communities and searching out those leaders that are already leading, and having those communities have a say in who their leaders are, and then not just the cherry picking from those of privilege, cherry picking who they would like to see in those roles, I think is really key to power and autonomy. And then finally, once people are in advising or in decision-making roles, a lot of times they may be their first in their family, having the support for them, both technical assistance, support for existing representatives. I know a lot of people have an issue, I know myself, like childcare and other ways that we can support those once they are in office so that they can stay in office and do their best work. So there are many ways to address shared prosperity across the domains, but with the landscape analysis and our focus on impact and feasibility, we've identified these as the starting point for our consideration. And with that, I'll turn it back to Shireen to take questions.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Kalima and Roseanne. It's wonderful to have you all here to represent some of the strategies that the council has identified. We want to take a moment here to answer some of the questions that have been coming up in the chat over the course of the time that we have been here together, and some of which I have been able to go ahead and respond to in the chat. But I did want to take this moment to respond to some that are coming up. For example, there's a question here about, has the landscape scan of navigation support services been done or planned? When we say the landscape scan, it really is not a full analysis. Sometimes doing an analysis of any particular sector or strategy can really be a dissertation in and of itself. But what we wanted to do was crowdsource an understanding of the general efforts underway. What we understand around our scan of navigation supports, we understand there to be what I would say more of a disjointed processes, but there are ones in the system, whether they're El Concilio that provides them, Redwood City Together. So our community-based organizations are supporting and sponsoring promotores or systems navigators in specific areas. They may be in schools, they may be for youth. We also have systems navigators in our county systems, whether they're related to a specific type of medical care or mental health program. But one of the things we were clear about is that there was not an integrated promotora or systems navigation support, particularly integrated across systems, and certainly not integrated across whole families. So that's where we saw a critical gap. But we have, and so that is the scan that we've done, but not a full analysis. Let's see, another question that came up was around how as San Mateo County residents or San Mateo County workers were defined. And I did ask Derek this question, and he said that the indicators on the dashboard are defined, and they are defined from around workers in San Mateo County. So not residents that work, but workers in San Mateo County. And you'll see all of the definitions of the indicators noted in the dashboard itself. Thank you, Derek. Appreciate that. Let's see here. The slide deck, I should say, there's been a number of questions that have come up around that. The slide deck will absolutely be available. We will send it out to all the folks who registered for this. We also are recording this session, so we can send out the recording as well. We have a question in the chat, in fact, that says, how does the landscape of deportations of undocumented residents affect achieving your goals? I think there is a real big challenge right now for our immigrant populations, whether it's the mental health that they're experiencing with the attacks, regardless of any kind of what their immigration status is. There's a lot of assumptions being made around criminality and the relationship with immigrant populations based on national rhetoric. As far as locally an integration of thinking about this, we see that we've already seen school attendance going down in the last couple of months for fear of the concepts of deportation. So that, as you can imagine, if kids are not in school, they're not learning, and they're not going to be able to reach their full potential, let alone shared prosperity. We have seen also our people missing appointments. There's a big fear out there, and we certainly imagine that fear, that very real fear, will keep people away from the supports and systems that could help achieve shared prosperity for our county. Thank you for raising that. Let's see. Are there data points in the dashboard being shared with joint venture Silicon Valley's team to include in the annual indicator report? It looks like Derek's going to be responding to this because he does also have a partnership where he works with joint venture Silicon Valley. So I will go ahead and let him respond to that. But since I raised it, I think it is important. So it says that basically he's sharing common data points since he works closely. He's been closely in touch with joint venture Silicon Valley, and joint venture Silicon Valley scope includes other counties besides San Mateo County. So this dashboard is sits alone and only showcases the county. All right, let's take a couple of additional questions. Has the current national government in any way tried to interfere with this progress? And if not yet, how will this be supported if when they do? Excellent question. I think that we are in the process of living in uncertainty, as most, I think, or many of you are, whether it's in your organizations or in your personal lives, the uncertainty that another executive order will drop or how things will be implemented. We are doing our best to recognize that local government requires us to be trusted to our community. And that means that we have to differentiate ourselves from the national government, who is looking at, for example, immigration very differently than we might look at it, where we are looking at residents as our responsibility. We're looking at being the social safety net for our communities, and that requires us to be there for all our residents, regardless of any kind of documentation. We know and we believe that we all thrive in San Mateo County when we all thrive in San Mateo County. So we're trying really hard to mitigate any risk, any immediate risks or risks that we are aware of with the federal government taking dollars away that are for critical services to serve our communities, while we are working very hard to maintain the trust and support of our community, which we value. We're holding on to our values very tightly. So thank you for that question. Okay, we have some data questions that Derek is responding to in the audience, which is in the chat. So you can go ahead and go there to see some of that. So thank you for doing that, Derek. Here's another point about stable living wage jobs with opportunities for advancement, access to safe, stable, affordable, and accessible childcare is a critical support that enables women to stay in the workforce and advance their careers. This is completely aside from the developmental and educational benefits to children. Absolutely, thank you for raising that. It is critical, and it's been lifted up over and over by our local communities as a priority. And we do have the Child Care Collaborative that has been thinking across the developmental line on how, around how to support families and children. And we know that that issue continues to come up and has been added by the local community to our framework, the affordable childcare and youth development as well. So thank you for raising that. Let's see here, if there's any other questions. I'm looking for questions that have not been answered yet.
I mean, it looks like about 3 or 4 just came in this last minute.
How do you plan to ensure this tool is meaningfully used internally and externally to the Office of Racial and Social Justice? That's a great question. I think part of this webinar is about that. It's to make sure that we are sharing this information out, getting feedback from the community, from leaders like yourselves. We intentionally focused on this webinar being focused on grass tops, those that are leading organizations, those that are in organizations, supporting communities, so that we could hear from you what data would be helpful. Is this framework helpful? If we could collectively come together around some of these approaches and the predictors, then we could make a lot more progress than anyone could individually. So, so we do plan to share this with our department directors. We're getting their feedback in May. At our board of directors meeting. We are also sharing this we're going to communities, and we'll share this a little bit later with you, some next steps around going to community, partnering with community partners to actually have community conversations to get their feedback. So once that's been integrated, we do plan to do broad outreach, but it is always helpful when people have been integrated into the process of development. For them, that helps us ensure that it'll be used outside of our system, just us. Okay, let's see. Oops. For organizations that provide a safety net like libraries, how can we ensure they are supported and acknowledged as vital when there is so much more on specific priorities like housing? I think that's an excellent point. The challenges in our communities are absolutely taking over because they're so large. And in that way, we don't often talk about the assets that we have in our communities because we're so focused on the chasm that is housing. That is such a huge barrier for people to then be able to use some of those wonderful opportunities like the libraries. They are absolutely vital because not only are they're places of safety, they provide access to books, but they also are places where we have seen wonderful trainings happening on economic opportunity and financial literacy. They provide lots of different resources. It is vitally important to think about those kinds of assets. And one of the things that we do want to make sure it gets captured is that we want to build on assets. So if there are opportunities to do anything related to lifting up those assets, please do reach out and let us know. Since the Shared Prosperity Coordinating Council is large, how do you ensure the diverse members are engaged and contribute? We have been incredibly lucky to have a wonderful set of leaders that are very committed to working together, learning from one another, and building a uniform approach to shared prosperity. Each of the organizations are often already working on this concept from their vantage point and from where their skills and their organizational missions lay. And yet they see the gaps that are their clients experience, their communities experience. So what this Shared Prosperity Council is an opportunity to look across that landscape around what's missing and help identify what strategies could help fill those gaps. So I think that has been motivating, bringing people together. We're also, most of our meetings, while they are very focused on getting feedback and moving the work forward, but we often have partner presentations. So it's not just about the work that we're doing collectively or collaboratively. We're also learning a lot about what other organizations are doing, what resources are out there. Thank you for the question. All right, let's see. Here's one more question and then I will move us to next steps. Has consideration been given to piloting a basic income project countywide? What about training and incentives for businesses that show progress in lifting up low-wage workers? Thank you for the question and the idea as well. The piloting of basic income projects has definitely been something that the council has thought of. And in fact, there are a number of pilots already underway that the county contributes to or directly implements. One is a basic income project with our foster care youth that's been led through our Human Services Agency, Children and Family Services. We also have a pilot focused on, in partnership with and leadership of Supervisor Spears, focused on pregnant women on Medicaid. So we have been testing these out and we'll continue to look at scaling as the learnings come in. Thank you for these questions. Really appreciate your engagement and continue support for this work, and your feedback is incredibly important. All right, let's go ahead and go to the next slide. I will share that I'm hearing that, okay. So for our next steps, we are going to take your feedback from here. And our next step is that we've been planning for about 7 community conversations with our community-based organizations that are trusted leaders in their communities. So as part of our council, for example, we have been working with Judith at Coastside Hope to host a community conversation with her clients and community members around asking the very same questions that are coming up here, but we're asking them in different ways. For example, instead of sharing this broad framework and saying, hey, do you like it or not? We're gonna likely ask the question of, what does shared prosperity mean to you? What are key aspects to prosperity in your life? Ask questions of, instead of asking the details around the data, we might ask the question of, how do we know if your communities are doing well? How do you know? What are ways that we know and can track how well our communities are doing in relation to prosperity or some of these other indicators? And then what kinds of programs or strategies would make a difference in your life or your community's life? And so those questions, with the 7 different groups that we're working with, we have a partnership with Job Train, Daily City Partnership, a number of other organizations part of our council, to really bring a diversity of representation and voice into informing the action plan for the Shared Prosperity Council. Once we finish that and we work on integrating that feedback ultimately into the dashboard, into the framework, if there are any changes proposed, then what we'll do is reconvene a virtual meeting that will invite as many people who are interested to share back what we find and the final feedback. And hopefully we will have an updated dashboard to be able to share with you as well. But that work is very extensive, so we imagine that'll be an ongoing set of efforts underway. And then with that, we had a closing by Supervisor Gaucher that we were hoping to share with you, but I have gotten a message that unfortunately they're having technical issues that we were not able to help them resolve, sadly. Supervisor Gaucher has been a wonderful new member of the council since she became part of the Board of Supervisors. Her focus on equity and just and fair inclusion and economic opportunity has been clear throughout her career as an elected official and beyond that. And we're very thankful to be working in partnership with her and Supervisor Corso, as well as all the leaders on the council and all of you, because this approach isn't just about what we can do. The idea is, can this approach or the principles be integrated into and across our individual organizations? Can this framework help us understand how collectively we come together to build and advance shared prosperity? And how can we track and look at data, speak with community, and overcome the barriers for the segments of the population that are furthest from meeting the universal goals related to shared prosperity? So we really thank Supervisor Gaucher and apologize for the technical challenges that prohibited her from being able to participate. In the next slide, I want to certainly thank you for sharing, for participating. Really appreciate the level of engagement that we've had. If you would, we'd like you to do one last Mentimeter for us to share with us how useful you felt today's webinar was. What other forums could this information be shared in? Where could you see it valuable for us to share and get additional feedback? And any other feedback that you have. So we'll pause here. We are giving you about 10 minutes. And the URL as well as the code is in the chat, thanks to Andrew. And while we are paused on this, for you to share your survey results and how well today did, so that we can continue to improve. I also want to thank Megan Aminto, who is on the back end. She's the one sharing her screen. She's been a critical partner of mine in helping facilitate and analyze the data for the Shared Prosperity Coordinating Council, a real partner in crime on that. And then Andrew, Knack, who you have seen in the chat, he's been very helpful in navigating troubleshooting issues and making sure that we are all set with the technical challenges that we are all having. And I really want to thank Supervisor Corso, as well as Supervisor Gaucher, for their diligence in participating in the council, for leading on these terms, and for having agreed to join us today. Also, Kalima Salahuddin and Roseanne Faust have been steadfast partners in this council since the very beginning of the Recovery Council, have shared incredibly important aspects to how we understand the work moving forward. And this has been a theme throughout our time together, where each council member really is sharing critical feedback and ideas and resources based on their vantage point. Clearly, this webinar right now has given us the opportunity to bring in the vast knowledge of all of you attendees. I do want to pause and thank all of you. The Mentimeter will remain open. We will take a look at it, but I am happy to give you back a few more minutes of your life. I know we're all incredibly busy in the spring. Thank you all for joining us today, and we look forward to hearing from you on the Mentimeter results of the survey. Many thanks.